All right, you're all set.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I know we're going to have people still trickling in, but um, we'll get started on this just to be respectful of everyone's time here. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining today's panel discussion on New York's Brownfield Cleanup Program, the use of the Brownfield tax credits in the capital stack, and some practical development considerations that shape whether these projects actually move forward. So my name is Lindsey Haubenreich. I'm a partner at Phillips Lytle, and I co-lead the firm's land use and zoning team, and I also co-lead our firm's energy and renewables team. I'm really excited to be here today to have the opportunity to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is the Brownfield Cleanup Program. And just a very quick housekeeping item. So we are using Slido to take questions from the audience. You can type that in. It should either be right in your WebEx window, or you should be able to see it in the apps feature. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Slido chat, and we will do our best to monitor them and respond to them throughout the project, the program. So brownfields, right? Brownfields are often viewed as challenging properties, but they do also represent some of the greatest redevelopment opportunities in our communities. The Brownfield Cleanup Program, since its infancy, has helped transform a lot of underutilized and contaminated sites into really successful projects of all types: housing, commercial development, mixed use, manufacturing, industrial, really turning underutilized sites into community assets. So while brownfield is often viewed as an environmental issue, in practice, it's a lot more than that. And it really, especially the utilization of the Brownfield Cleanup Program, here in New York, it really sits at the intersection of environmental law with sort of tax and finance, land use, public policy, real estate development. It really combines all of these areas in order to make a successful brownfield project. And really, so a successful project is not just getting into the program, but aligning your cleanup obligations, your tax credit assumptions, your project timing, your lender expectations, sort of aligning all of those things together, and successfully navigating all of that can be challenging, and really requires a lot of collaboration, right, with your environmental consultants, your attorneys, your lenders, your investors, really all of them kind of coming together to make a successful project. So today's conversation is intended to provide a practical roadmap sort of for how to fit a lot of these pieces together from three complementary perspectives. So first, sort of the legal and regulatory framework of the program itself, right? What does the program entail? About how long does it take to get through it? What credits are available? And then second, sort of the financing and structuring issues associated with utilizing brownfield tax credits and their role in capitalization. And then third, right, the developer's perspective, right? How do you actually use these credits? How do these incentives influence site selection, feasibility, and overall project execution? So with that, I'd like to introduce our three panelists today. So first, we have Molly Brennan. She's a special counsel here with Phillips Lytle. Molly has significant expertise in handling complex environmental, land use, wetland, regulatory, compliance, legislative, and procurement matters. Whew, Molly, I'm tired just reading this.
That was too much. I'm exhausted.
Molly has significant experience with the wetland regulations, New York's Part 360 solid waste program, landfill closure and post-closure controls, the Brownfield Cleanup Program, Article 78 challenges, extended producer responsibility proposals, and circular economy initiatives. In her past roles in private practice and in government, she's advised on all aspects of development projects, first in San Francisco and then in New York City, where she resides. Her counsel has included site assessment and site control, environmental analyses, entitlement approvals, contract negotiations, and purchase, sale, lease, and license agreements. As the head of the Environmental Law Division at New York City's Department of Sanitation, she played a key role in implementing environmental initiatives by the city to meet its sustainability and renewable energy goals. In this role, Molly advised on zoning, land use, and seeker with a C, as well as seeker with an S, requirements of DASNY facilities and initiatives, including New York City's commercial waste zone program, the new construction proposals for Manhattan 11, Bronx 9, 10, 11, and the Queens 1 facilities, and mandatory citywide organics programs and the commercial organics law. Molly has also assisted the New York City's Office of Environmental Coordination in drafting the most recent Seeker with a C technical manual. So welcome, Molly.
Yeah, thank you. Tired after hearing that.
And now Jillian. Jillian Dunbar is a partner at Phillips Lytle in our banking group. Jillian represents financial institutions in a wide variety of commercial lending transactions with a focus on affordable housing and community development deals, middle market lending. Jillian has significant experience counseling lenders on transactions involving federal and state low-income housing tax credits, historic tax credits, and brownfield tax credits, including construction loans, private bond purchases, letter of credit issuances, and construction lending under Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae programs. Jillian also frequently works on traditional middle market deals that are secured by real estate and uniform commercial code collateral. Jillian represents lenders at all stages of loan transactions, including structuring the transaction, reviewing complex real estate structures such as condominiums and ground leases, analyzing title and lien law issues, drafting and negotiating loan documents, working with government agencies, municipalities, and housing authorities, and of course, closing the loan. Welcome, Jillian. And last but certainly not least, we have David Marin from Pennrose LLC. David joined Pennrose in May of 2023, contributing 5 years of experience in architecture, construction, and development industry. Before joining Pennrose, he served as the studio leader for Community Flex at Gensler, where he focused on establishing the Affordable Housing Design Center through business development, client relationships, RFP response leaderships, and speaking engagements. David also participated in the design and project management of over 10 million square feet of mixed income and mixed use developments. He has a Bachelor of Arts in Architecture from the Universidad de los Andes, and in 2023, he earned an MS in Real Estate Finance from New York University's Schack Institute of Real Estate, and where he is also a Hirsch Fellow, a title he earned after completing the program through the highly specialized honors cohort for the finance track. David is currently leading a number of exciting and impactful projects throughout New York and beyond, but specifically for our conversation today, I wanted to point out 3 exciting New York projects. First, Pennrose is working with the Troy Housing Authority and the Troy Local Development Corporation on a comprehensive redevelopment of 2 long vacant public housing towers and 2 HUD-RAD towers in downtown Troy, New York. For those that are in Western New York, in particular in Buffalo, Pennrose was designated by the Buffalo Municipal Housing Authority to redevelop the federal public housing sites known as the Commodore Perry homes, and it is really exciting to see those go up. And Pennrose is also working on the North Thawed project, which will be a mix of affordable and market rate housing and will add to the growing vitality of Canal Side here in Buffalo. And it sits right outside Phillips Lytle's offices, and we stick our nose to the window and look outside and watch that go on. We're watching the Brownfield development happen right now, and we just find it really exciting. So, David, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. And having worked with both Molly and Jill, I will say that the attendees are in for a treat.
So with that, I'd like to let's just first kind of ground us in the Brownfield cleanup program itself. Right, for many people, Brownfield redevelopment begins with tax credits. They're saying, hey, what can I get out of this? Is this worth it? But really, before you can have any discussion of monetization, there has to be a site that can actually qualify to get into the program, a strategy for moving through the program, and a realistic path to getting to a certificate of completion, to getting through the program so you can actually realize those tax credits. So Molly, I'd like to start with you. Can you walk us through just, how the Brownfield cleanup program works from a high level, including some eligibility and some key regulatory milestones?
Absolutely, I'd love to. And thank you for that fantastic introduction and the tee off today's program. It's obvious that Lindsey and Jillian and David and I geek out about the Brownfield cleanup program. So hold on to your hats. First, I just want to say that New York State is unique. And while most states do have some type of form of a brownfield cleanup program, New York State's program is widely viewed as having the most generous. It's in terms of the breadth of tax credits and also their transferability. For background, it was established in 2003, and there's been 2 amendments since that time in 2008 and in 2015. The key changes in those amendments are they changed the definition of brownfield site. Prior to the change in 2015, brownfield sites, you could go into a pre-app meeting with DEC and say, you know, there's a risk of contamination. Now you have to show the levels of contamination before you enter the program. And that's going to be my first time where I say all of this is pre-planning and doing your work ahead of time. Also, what did happen through the amendments is there were caps on the dollar amount of tax credits. Originally, there were none when the program was enacted in 2003. So now there's 3 generations of BCP sites, which maybe Jillian will get into as we talk about tax credits, but it's 2003 to 2008, 2008 to 2015, and 2015 to present. As the name of the program gives a little clue to what the purpose is, but it's to incentivize private sector remediation or cleanup of contaminated properties. And with that, the benefit to the applicant is you receive a release from liability for environmental conditions that run with the land and extensive tax credits, which is really one of the purposes of today's presentation. So you can enter as a volunteer or a participant. A volunteer is what it sounds like. You weren't involved in any of the historic contamination, but participant is at one point that participant either owned or operated the site and is potentially responsible for some of the contamination that exists on the site. So participants, just real quick, have a heavier burden placed on them because they have to fully investigate and characterize the nature of the contamination on the site. The success of the program, I just want to touch on it quickly. DEC annually has an update on where the program is in applications and which sites have obtained the finish line, which is the certificate of completion. In April 2026, the most recent update by DEC, they reported that over 1,430 applications have been entered into the program, and 707 have reached that finish line, the magic certificate of completion. So it actually is a success story. So one key to keep in mind is when the project reaches the COC, the project is actually a dual agency project. It's overseen by DEC, and then it shifts to the Department of Tax and Finance when you are at the tax credit stage. Quickly, the definition of brownfield site I already touched on had been changed, and now it requires that you are showing the contamination is present at levels that exceed the soil cleanup objectives or any other health-based standard that is set by DEC. So it does exclude, the definition of brownfield site does exclude certain sites, which are basically sites that DEC and the state see as already having contamination and a potential responsible party under CERCLA to clean up that contamination. So if you think about it in this way, they don't want to give tax credits when there is a potential responsible party that should be on the hook for cleaning up that contamination. We'll get into this more when David and Jillian start talking about tax credits and the tracks, but there's 4 levels of cleanup under the BCP program. Track 1 is there's no restriction on use and no long-term institutional engineering controls. So the full remediation of the site allowing you to reach track 1. Track 2 is restricted to the levels of the soil cleanup objectives for the intended use, residential being the highest use down to industrial. And tracks 3 and 4 are both restricted to their intended uses as well. So how this all works on a practical level is really there's sort of 3 stages. One is the pre-application meeting stage with BCP. And I'm going to start there. Now, first, it does sound like pre-application meeting, does sound to people like it's just, hi, we're going to introduce ourselves. Here's the site that we're thinking. But now with the change in the definition to brownfield site, the pre-app meeting, you really have to have already done your work. So you've done your phase 1, you've started your investigation of the site, and you have actually found contamination exceeding the proposed use. Effectively, you're presenting at that pre-application meeting a concrete case of the contamination that you found on the site and why that site is eligible to be in the program. We've been involved in projects where the pre-app meeting application, DEC would say, I don't see it here. Why don't you either go back and do more, or you can have a meeting with us where we kind of just explain the program in general. And that would be, one of the first steps that you're kind of starting over and doing more work and then coming back. So all of this, you'll hear us all repeat throughout this program, which is do the work ahead of time and be ready to kind of move through the program as swiftly as possible by always doing the work yourself and not requiring DEC to kind of determine from a huge phase 1 or huge phase 2 what the contamination is, spell it out. So after the pre-app meeting, you then can submit the application. Here again, just saying, avoid being incomplete, because all of it goes in kind of an unending loop. If you get a comment back to your first BCP application submittal that says you didn't explain X or Y, it's just adding time to the project. Third, after submitting the application, and you'll receive a letter of complete application if you've submitted a complete application. And then your fourth and big stage is getting a BCA or Brownfield Cleanup Agreement from DEC. Now we've switched into stage 2 once you've entered a BCA agreement with DEC. So now we're shifting into planning the remedial investigation and doing that work. And the key here is this is when we start documenting our costs. So the remedial, there's 5 docs really from the BCA to the COC. And with each of those, I'll again say, show your work. But it's basically your work plan. You're working through your remedial investigation work plan. You're providing alternatives analysis, depending on your tracks, it will be required. And you're moving towards the decision document, the remedial action work plan, which describes exactly what it is, its title. It's your work plan for remediating the site. And then getting to a final engineering plan and the big finish, the certificate of completion. So I think that from there, we really should be talking about, Lindsey, kind of key issues, legal issues that we see throughout those stages. So I'm just gonna shift to that. Some key, and Lindsey, please add at any point that if you're thinking of other tips at this stage. But what is key is get proof of site access from the site owner. DEC will need clear proof, and it will be one of the things that can slow you down. Know the parameters of your site is a tip, where we've had many applicants, clients that we've worked with that start saying it's this site and this lot and block, and then later on they shift to wanting to maybe expand it. And if you've already have your BCA with a defined site, this is again going to require an amendment and set you back in time. So other things to think about is zoning. Does the zoning of the site permit your end use? Think about coordination there and timing. On ownership entity, basically the key thing to think is that it's easier to use the same entity to file the BCP application and execute the agreement. So we generally talk through with our clients what's the best entity formation and how to do that. And with each entity formation, say it's an LLC, we advise them through, preparing an LLC resolution, showing all members of the application, and showing that all members of the LLC unanimously consent to the actions that are being taken to enter into the BCP. And just a quick discussion of fee waiver. There is a fee waiver application to DEC, and you have to demonstrate financial hardship. While it's written in a broad way, DEC, from our experience right now, is only granting fee waivers to projects that have 100% affordable housing, which, David knows as well. And so if there is a non-residential aspect, it must be primarily serving the residents of the housing project. So Lindsey, would you like to add any legal issues that before we turn it over to David?
No, I'll just say the fee is the latest Brownfield iteration added a $50,000 program fee that needs to be returned along with the signed Brownfield cleanup agreement. That's what Molly's referring to. But no, I think that was great. And I think it this flows nicely into you, David, right? So from the developer standpoint, right, Brownfield projects often have an opportunity and friction really all at the same time, right? There's a lot of available credits available, but you got to go through this regulatory process. However, the program can really be useful in helping to justify a project or to provide a financing gap. But again, you're in a program where a little bit of the timing and the issues are out of your control, or as you start digging down, right, we don't really know what we're going to always find. So I think from your perspective, from the developer's perspective, right, how do you sort of assess whether a site is a good candidate for the Brownfield cleanup program? Just to kind of start there with you.
Yeah, I think the first thing you got to do is start with eligibility, right? Since the 2015 reforms, tangible property credits, and let's be absolutely clear, we need the tangible credits to make a Brownfield site pencil. And they're limited, right? They have to pass one of a few gates. The site either has to be located in an end zone, which is a high poverty or high unemployment area. It has to be what DC considers upside down properties, where the cost of cleanup is 75% or more of the project's value as if uncontaminated, which is hard to prove, or underutilized properties, also as defined by DEC, which is a very narrow definition. And then finally, sites redeveloped as affordable housing, which is my area of expertise. And that's why that's sort of like the criteria that ends up clearing the field. And then there's another couple of gates, projects located in a disadvantaged community within a designated Brownfield opportunity area that meet the conformance determinations, and then renewable energy facility sites. So if you gotta make sure that you're under one of those, and very clearly so, before you pursue this. And then we move on to existing due diligence, right? Whether it's an RFP or a brokered opportunity or a private site, there's usually existing phase 1s, phase 2s, and you got to look at the history of the site. What contaminants are plausible given past uses? Was there a gas station there? Was there dry cleaners? Were there prior buildings built on historic fill? So crushed brick and other contaminant materials that were used in the 50s moved around for grading and foundations. And then if A is true and B is true, then you move on to C, which is to run some numbers. Take remediation cost assumptions, do your best bet. It's early stages, on a per square foot basis, and model, both the track 1, the track 4 cleanup scenarios. If you're, and we'll talk about those in a second. But if you're a residential developer like me, track 2 or 3 don't really make a ton of sense in most cases. So we only look at 1 to 4. And then we just run a couple models to see how it works out the other end. There are big nuances in what generates credit bases. So, run best and worst case scenarios the way you would in any financial model. Is demolition of an existing structure basis eligible? The answer is it depends. Are there hits underneath the structure that are going to justify it? Is it eligible to the extent it's directly tied to the remedial work plans? So run it both ways and assume the worst case, right? Make assumptions for excavation, for soil export, for disposal, labor, fencing, etc. And you can do all this in-house. If you don't have a deep pre-screening experience with Brownfield sites, then definitely lean on friendly environmental lawyers and friendly engineer environmental consultants to check your assumptions. You can do all of this before you decide to pursue a site, before you place it under site control, and before spending any money. And then I think number three, which is inescapable, is you got to spend that. You got to then spend some money. Take what the site history tells you, and if your legal and environmental technical team advises it, do a targeted investigation in the areas of the site where hits are most likely, to see if it comes back with enough contaminants such that it would have a decent chance of being emitted into DEC. So as far as how the program affects feasibility, it affects the entirety of the project in two places: the budget and the schedule, right? And developers in the Sculpt will say, well, that's all we do, schedule and budget. And that's right. It affects everything, right? On the budget side, the impact is positive in the substantial majority of cases. That is, if you're building a building that generates tangible property credits, and the bigger the building, the better. Now there's some nuance. If you're building a very small building that's somehow still financially feasible on a large site, and your plan is to develop it long after the site is remediated, you may need to reconsider whether entering the program as a volunteer is your best bet. But in most cases, and certainly in every case here at Pennrose, we have 5 active brownfield sites right now. Being admitted into the BCP is great news, and we see it as a silver bullet that can get a program financed and across the finish line. On the schedule side, however, the exact opposite happens. The BCP is almost certainly going to extend your timeline, and quite significantly. During pre-development especially, this will be the most time-intensive entitlement the project received prior to closing in New York State. Unless you're doing a ULURP in New York City or something like that, and if you are, God bless you. But if if you're not, if you're immortal like me, and you're just doing normal entitlement cycles, this will be your critical path. And that comes with associated carrying costs and costs of capital. It adds liability to your construction timeline, especially if you have a large construction loan outstanding. And then remediation takes longer than anticipated, so does construction, interest, and carry, right? So both impacts are significant. I have projects where BCP is 8% of the capital stack. I've seen it with it being at 20% of the capital stack. But as it can help your budget in a meaningful way, it also can add months or years to your schedule. So you got to take that into account. And then as far as where public partnerships comes in, since we're talking about New York State, the program at the state level, if you're working with agencies like ESD, HFA, HCR, or at the city level, HPD, HDC, all these agencies view the BCP very favorably, right? DEC is their sister agency, and in the past couple of years, we've actually started to see very positively, I might add, real coordination between ESD, HCR, and DEC to track the schedules of projects with an executed brownfield cleanup agreement. And that's given DEC a previously non-existent incentive to keep projects moving through the BCP judiciously, but it also helps your project with agencies that are going to help finance it. So triple thumbs up from a feasibility perspective if you're trying to get into the state's queue, right? I guess I'll pause there and turn it back to you.
Yeah, and we did get a question that came in that says some states don't allow petroleum-based sites to enter a brownfield cleanup program. Does New York State require a mix of contamination types in order to qualify for the brownfield cleanup program? And I'll just say, right, New York State does allow you to enter the brownfield cleanup program for petroleum unless you're already subject to some other type of enforcement order or consent order, but they do allow a mix of contamination types. So, just kind of tackle that question. But I think with that, let's flip to the financing side. Right. So obviously the the main point of, right, we all want to clean up contaminated sites, right? And sometimes maybe geographically, it's a great site to pick, right? An abandoned, shuttered site is a good from a lot of perspectives, but let's be honest, we're doing the Brownfield cleanup program so that we can get these credits. And so, right, these credits can materially change the capital stack of your project, right? David, you're saying 8, sometimes 20% of your capital stack can be associated with these credits. And that's huge. Right. So once you have a project that, right, is in the program, you've maybe got an effective strategy to get through the program, hopefully some alignment with some of your other agencies, a path towards your certificate of completion. Let's get into sort of how the economics actually work. So Molly, I'd like to start with you. Can you just walk us through the different types of credits that are available, and when sort of in the construction development process, those credits can start to be claimed?
Sure. We just get to that portion of my program. So there's 3 types of tax credits. And I know that David and Jillian will definitely want to discuss these in more detail. But the first type of credit is the site prep credit. And it is just like its name. It's all costs properly charged to a capital account that are paid to obtain the remediation sign-off from DEC. So these costs include your cost to prepare the site, to erect a building, money spent on demo, asbestos abatement, excavation, scaffolding, fencing, temporary electrical wiring, security costs, and the amount of the credits depends on really the level of cleanup, which takes us back to the 4 tracks. So it ranges from 22 to 50% of eligible costs. And when you claim those is in the tax year following the COC, and up to 5 years thereafter. So a lot of this is linked to the COC and when that magic date is. And what I should have said during the COC discussion is you're constantly looking back at that COC to see what your eligible tax credits are, particularly when you're, as Jillian will talk about, when you're talking about transferring the property and the eligibility for the tax credits to another ownership entity. Next type of tax credit of the 3 is on-site groundwater monitoring. And those credits obviously extend to the costs of remediating on-site groundwater. It's post-COC, site prep, and groundwater monitoring required to comply with your COC. The key here is you cannot double dip. So in other words, if you included groundwater monitoring and cleanup costs in your site prep, you can't include it in the separate groundwater monitoring tax credit ability. So with groundwater monitoring, you can also apply for those credits annually for 5 years following the COC. And lastly, the qualified tangible property credit. And this is the most lucrative. Amounts can range from 10 to 25% of the value of improvements. They're subject to a cap. The lesser of 35 million or 3 times the site prep cost for residential and commercial uses, or 45 million or 6 times the site preparation cost for manufacturing uses. It's based on the cost of depreciable property used for construction or redevelopment, and it includes buildings, building fixtures, equipment, machinery used on site, etc. Applicants have 10 years from the issuance of the COC to put a building into service and to start claiming the tangible property credit.
Thanks,
so I'll
Molly.
tip that back over to you. Thanks.
Yeah. So Jillian, to turn to you. So, right, BCP tax credits are more than a tax credit. They can operate more like a monetizable project asset. So, you work, on the lending side for a lot of these types of transactions. Can you walk us through what you see as the major structuring and underwriting considerations in these types of transactions?
Yep, I'm happy to. So, kind of one of the initial questions that people think of is, we're getting these tax credits. So why would we even need to bring in a lender, right? We have these tax credits. Why is a lender needed? And the issue is because you're not getting those tax credits until the CFC is issued and you've applied for your refund, and then you submit your tax return, and then you eventually get the cash back. During that time period, you're going to have a contractor who wants to be paid. And so that is why bridge financing from a lender comes in handy. So the way that you think of that is that the lender is paying those costs of the remediation of the vertical construction while you're waiting for the refunds to come in. And then the refund is used to essentially pay off that bridge financing. That's a simplified version. I'm sure David can explain to you that it's never that simple. There's a lot more in the capital stack, but that's kind of the simplest version. So when you're looking at how do I go about and monetize that? How do I use my tax credit to get a lender to give me bridge financing? There's two different structures that are primarily used. One is the structure that we see a lot in the affordable housing arena, where there's already an investor coming into the project and they're going to be purchasing the low income housing tax credits. And a lot of times you can say to them, hey guys, do you also want to purchase these brownfield tax credits? And that's an easy way to get the money that you're going to want. And so in that structure, you have that investor join as a member of the project or owner special purpose entity. And under the organizational documents, there will be an agreement that the brownfield tax credits will flow up to that investor member. And then in return, the investor member is going to pay a purchase price, which is essentially kind of like the refund they're going to get, not as much, but a purchase price for it. And that's going to flow in. Again, the question is, if you have this investor, why do you need a bridge lender? Well, because the investor is also going to be hedging their bets again, because they know they're not going to actually get any benefit from that tax credit until the remediation is done for the vertical construction, until the vertical construction is done. So they say, you know, we'll give you 10% of the purchase price when you close on the bridge financing and you start the remediation. Once we see you get to a different benchmark, say 50% completion or 100% completion, more of the purchase price is going to flow into you. In that time period where you're waiting for that purchase price to flow in via the capital contributions, you're going to need a bridge lender. The other structure that we see, which isn't as common, mostly because it's in the LIHTC world, the low income housing tax credit world that I work. But there is another structure available, which is if you don't have kind of this third party investor who's going to come in and purchase your tax credits, because the brownfield tax credit is refundable, meaning when you file your taxes, if your tax liabilities do not exceed the benefit of that tax credit, you're going to get a refund. You can use that refund essentially to repay the bridge financing. So what we would do in that structure is you would have an affiliate of the project owner enter into the ownership structure as well. And then the tax credits can flow up to that affiliate of the project owner. And then the project owner, when they file their tax return, and fingers crossed, their tax liabilities do not exceed what they would be hoping to get as a refund under the Brownfield tax credit program, they then have that cash available to either have it flow in again as a capital contribution, or they could make it as a loan to the borrower, depending how they want to structure the transaction. And then that loan coming in or the capital contribution coming in would pay off the bridge lender. So I would say kind of deciding which structure you're going to use, whether you're going to have this third-party investor come in and purchase the tax credits, or whether you're going to use an affiliate of your kind of development entity or of that project owner to claim the refund. It is your first threshold question, because you're going to see some lenders that are very comfortable with this third-party structure and some lenders that are not comfortable with that third party structure and would rather do kind of more of like traditional bridge financing and not go into, you know, the whole tax credit investor world. And so that's going to be, I think, one of your primary things to decide which lender you're going to want to go with. Some other underwriting considerations, you know, that you're going to want to take into account as a lender, and that the project owner would want to be focused on is if you're going the track with the investor entity, it's important that whoever that investor entity is, that the lender considers them to be creditworthy, because the lender's repayment source is this investor actually making those capital contribution purchase prices, the purchase price payments. So they want to make sure that repayment source is actually going to come through and purchase the tax credit, that they have the credit worthiness, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, to actually be able to continue making the capital contribution, since they're not all coming in at closing. Another thing, if you're taking a separate track where the affiliate is going to be claiming the tax credits, you want to look at that affiliate closely. Look at what their tax liabilities are. They're going to be in a tricky situation if they have high tax liabilities every year, and New York State is immediately saying, okay, well, we're taking that refund to pay the tax liabilities first. You'll get whatever's left over. For a lender, you don't want someone saying, we might take some of your repayment source, but you can get whatever's left over. So that's things that a lender is going to want to look at. We're also going to want to, as a lender, make sure that what you're telling us you anticipate getting back in Brownfield tax credits is actually correct, that it's not, theoretical. As David will explain, 9 times out of 10, things shift once you actually get in and start doing the remediation. But we want to make sure at least the analysis that you've done is realistic with the information at the time. And so the lenders will often ask for something called an AUP, which is an agreed upon procedures report. So that's when you have an accountant, someone like, Resnick, looking at all of the information that you've given them, and they'll give out a report that can go to the lender saying, we've looked at all the information and this is the amount of tax credits that we anticipate, if all goes to plan, that the project would be eligible for. You can also get some sort of similar reassurance from an environmental consultant. They can prepare a memo. It's just your bank's going to want to make sure that what you're telling them is realistic. The last thing, and David touched on this, that's going to be extremely important for lenders to think about is the construction schedule. So as David said, this schedule often gets extended. I mean, every time it's always going to be extended because of remediation. Things are always going to pop up. So there's usually some sort of delays in these deals. So you want to make sure, one, that the construction schedule works. That's any lender. But something that we've seen kind of surprise lenders on the second structure of the affiliate waiting until they get the refund to pay back the loan is that the amount of time it actually takes to get the refund is significantly longer than many lenders will usually give on a term loan. So we try to tell them up front, do not expect to get paid off in 24 months or oftentimes 36 months. Because as Molly said, you have to go through all of the remediation. And then if you're also using the vertical construction, those tax credits back, then you're also going to have to get the project complete. But to even start claiming any tax credits, you need to have that COC. So your term of your loan is going to need to encompass the time to do remediation and then getting the COC. And then say you get the COC in February, you can't actually file your refund until the next year. So your term of your loan is going to have to take that into account. And then your refund is not immediate. It takes time to get your refund. So last I checked, it could be over a year to actually get your refund after you file your tax return. And so lenders need to take into account all of that before any funds come in being able to repay you. And so we tell them up front, when you're underwriting this, you need to underwrite a long construction term with multiple extensions, just so that everyone's on the same page.
Thanks, Jillian. To add, even more complications in, right, David, right, oftentimes you're stacking Brownfield credits with other credits, like with Lytle credits. Can you walk us through a little bit about that, about sort of how you go about stacking credits together and maybe sort of things you should tackle early on in the planning process to account for right, these different structures and programs and how they sort of interplay.
Absolutely. I'll build on what Jill just described so well. People should know if you're placing a project that has LIHTC plus any kind of state credits, let's call them state LIHTC or Brownfield tax credits, your capital market situation just got way more difficult than it otherwise would be. And and you should be working with people that know what they're doing. Because if you're doing option A, what Jill described, which is to monetize it, right? No one's gonna claim the tax liability. They're just gonna get the check from the state. That works if you're a really well capitalized, meaning you or your conventional equity LP investor don't need any of the Brownfield money during the construction period, or in some cases for up to 24 months or more than 24 months after the building's COC, because that's how long it takes for the check to come from the state. You get COC in year one, you get return filed in Q2 or Q3 of the following year, and then New York State DTF is going to do a desk audit that's going to run 18 to 24 months before the refund releases, landing you, 2.5, 3 years after COC for the tangent piece. So somebody has to bridge that money. Like Jill said, equity, mezzanine debt, like the name of the bridge and where it sits in the as it relates to first or last position of the capital stack. It nevertheless, like somebody has to bridge and somebody has to be comfortable with that collateral is coming. So it's not as easy to find that a conventional equity investor, or if you're a sponsor, it's not as easy to commit your own cash to doing that. And then when a check arrives, it's also known a little something called income, right? A taxable event that someone has to eat. I saw there was a question in the chat about Brownfields being incorporated into the cash flow. That, yeah, it can be done, but either the sponsor, the conventional equity LP investor, or the property has to assume that as a taxable event, and it may end up not offsetting the carrying cost or cost of capital of whoever fronted the money to build the building in the first place. And now, I suppose there's a workaround to that too, which is to have a friendly nonprofit contribute the proceeds to the project as a loan. If you're doing an affordable deal, maybe you already have a friendly nonprofit or a housing authority that's a partner in the deal. That's great. If you don't, then you have to go out and find it and have that friendly nonprofit contribute the proceeds as a loan. So it has some complications to structure. And then we're doing option B, which is to actually claim credits because you find someone that has the tax liability. If it's a BCP site only, there's a myriad of individuals and institutions that have gigantic New York State tax liabilities. So you shouldn't have a ton of trouble placing via probably a syndicator placing an investor, and that's a pretty straightforward structure. But if you have LIHTC in the deal, low income housing tax credits, then it becomes very complicated. People in the LIHTC world will be very familiar with the concept that credits follow depreciation, right? So to claim the credits, the investor has to own 99.9% of the property. Ownership is what entitles them to claim the credits and the associated depreciation and losses benefits. The Brownfield credits are no different. They also follow depreciation. So if the LIHTC investor wants to claim depreciation at the same time as a separate Brownfield tax credit investor, they just can't. And that is why it is exceptionally difficult for the LIHTC investor and the BTC investor to be different people, right? If they're the same, you can find someone who has both the federal liability for LIHTC and the state liability for Brownfields, the same, then they just take 99%, they claim both sets of credits and claim a single set of depreciation, so that's no problem. But what that means is now your pool of buyers is limited to people who have both federal and state tax liability. And that is honestly, as I have encountered, a short list of people. right? So that also ends up hurting pricing, right? There's another option if you're doing it, which is a tax credit ownership flip, right? If you can't place, but you still want to sell the credits, there's a possibility of this ownership swap, because Lytle is a 10-year credit while the Brownfield credit is a one and done. So in this structure, the BTC investor holds as much as ownership in the property as it needs to claim the tangible property piece. So it can be 30%, can be 80%, however much depreciable basis they need in order to claim the tangible credits that they're buying. And in an ideal world, in the window between the COC and the first Lytle unit leased, there's a swap, and ownership reverts back to the Lytle investor. And the problem is, once that first unit leases, the ownership structure has to revert. What ends up actually happening is that the lease-up timelines aren't that controllable. You don't just build them and they come. The starts don't align that beautifully. And then, so that first Lytle year, which is the stub year, becomes a year in which the Brownfield owner ends up having to stay on, sitting in the partnership at whatever percentage it held to achieve their tangible piece, which can be very high. And then the Lytle investor takes a hit, right, on depreciation and losses, and that ends up hurting the pricing that they give you, right? So for full disclosure, I've never actually executed the structure myself. I've only ever done the ones that was just described above. So my understanding of it is academic. But if after me having done my best to explain it, if you're still confused, well, guess what? So's the Lytle investor that I was pitching it to. So this headache alone will send half of your pool running for the simpler version of your deal. And in an environment, well, even plain vanilla Lytle is hard to place. Adding the Brownfield complication narrows the pool of people willing to write checks even further. So you gotta work with a good capital markets team.
So David, in your experience, or what are your biggest pressure points when you're doing these transactions?
Well, I mean, structure is a big one, right? Truth is, the structuring question is going to stay open until you have all your financing parties lined up. You don't know who where the Brownfield money is going to come from, and that sadly happens much closer to closing that we'd like to meet these days. And until then, you just got to keep your options open, right?
Yeah.
The best strategy is to be able to convey to your potential lenders and investors real confidence that you can execute the structure, whatever the lawyers come up with. Best way to do that is to have a team that has already vetted it, and before you shop it around, right? So, I mean, I hate to say it, and I apologize in advance to our very gracious host, but the developers on this call won't let me lie when we say, like, one of our biggest pet peeves is having to hire multiple law firms for a single deal. But if you're doing Brownfields, you're not going to have a choice, right? Jill and Molly and I just worked on a deal where there were the sponsor had to hire 5 different law firms, and 3 of them, were on just for the Brownfields. That's the best way to get ahead of the strategy. And I think that's the biggest pain point. Second to that, I would say early hard spend during pre-development. There's just no way around significant hard cost early in order to keep the project moving. You have to be comfortable with that. And if you're not, then you have to be okay with that the deal is going to take longer to close. Establishing basis, Jill touched on this, super important and very hard to do. So people in the call that are familiar with the Lytle program, that has been around since the 80s, right? Everyone and their mother can underwrite a Lytle deal with a great degree of precision. Not so with BCP. Lenders, investors, even ourselves, we struggle with the requirements of and building our own due diligence list to arrive at a basis that's informed. It's not just a question of how much remediation will cost. It's the remediation strategy itself, soil export volume, site cap thickness, plus how to prorate the costs that the Department of Finance and Taxation is going to treat as dual purpose, right? So costs that you needed to incur anyway because you were building a building, and how to prorate those, how conservative to be in the basis that you're underwriting versus the basis that you're going to end up, ultimately submitting to claim the credits is more of an art than a science. So, you got to have a really good team. Would say other pain point is the liability of construction, especially if you're doing a track one, that carries time and environmental liability. You have to chase down until you find native soil, if need be, to the ends of the earth. Even if it takes you off site beyond your own property line, if you can believe it, which is something that a lot of people have to think about before getting comfortable with. So yeah, I'll pause. I think those are the three main ones.
So JJ, from, what do you think developers should be thinking about early on when they're considering their finance strategy? What do lenders need to see before underwriting this anticipated value, right? Sort of when and early, and how often should we be approaching these lenders?
Yeah, so as David said, unfortunately, lenders at this point, you're not really engaging with them until you're much closer to closing and getting ready to start construction. I think really you have to decide which route you're going to go down. Are you able to get a third party syndicator or investor to come into the transaction? That's going to decide what pool of lenders you're going to approach. Are you instead going to do the second structure of getting the refund and bridging? That's going to be a different group of lenders that you would approach. In terms of when you're actually approaching them, what you're going to tell them, I mean, you really want to have an idea of the cost. They can't underwrite a theoretical development of, we're going to remediate. Are you able to help us with that? They need to have at least kind of an idea of how much they're going to be asked to bridge. And then you want to be, I think I would say, far enough down the path that you do have your remedial action work plan. I'm not sure how much you could really determine what your actual credits are going to be until an actual plan has been determined and you know what's going to happen moving forward. The other thing to keep in mind is that most lenders are going to want a decision document before you close. So, continue pursuing that. Don't think that just because, we picked our work plan that we're ready to go.
And, David, from your perspective, right, when you're thinking about brownfield projects that succeed, right, what do you think are some critical things that need to go right early on?
Well, I would say if you should get a really good team. I've had only good experiences with legal teams, and I've had great experiences with environmental technical teams, and some okay experiences with the technical teams, not so great ones. Experience and program knowledge aren't enough on their own. That's the baseline. Your team has to be really good at turnaround. If the public comment period ends on day 30, then the next submittal to DEC should land on day 31 at 9 a.m. And that is critical. Otherwise, it's just gonna drag you out. And I think the second thing that has to go right is internally your organization has to understand that this is your critical path. Actually, I can tell you right now, this is your critical path. BCP has 6 stages, and you have to go through 4 of these to get to a decision document, which, as Jillian just described, your lender is almost definitely going to require to close, right? So in the best of cases, when you don't stop and you don't run out of money, pre-development cash to spend, it takes 18 months. This is your critical path, and you should treat it as such if you are going to pursue brownfields. And then I would say, don't approach the project with presumptive remedies. If your numbers pencil better with track 4 and you end up getting pushed back into track 1, there will be a lot of redoing of work plans and investigation and painful pre-development spend that you won't get reimbursed for until closing. And you will end up in the same place regardless of how hard you try to steer your team and DEC into one direction. If they treat it as a significant threat, they're going to select the remedy for you. If not, then you get to pick, and you were going to pick the same thing in the first place. So the sampling you did beforehand won't change. And then But I would say number 4, this is a painful one. Spend as much as your risk level will permit. Key part of our job as developers is to calibrate risk wisely. And that said, on this aspect of projects, a pause is a very painful schedule-wise, and it will cause your closing to slip. So be comfortable with that.
Thank you. I know we're just past the 10 o'clock mark, so I'll just give everyone a final chance if there's anything else, any final words you want to say about the program or timing or anything like that. Molly, I can start with you. Any final words on the Brownfield program?
Yeah, I would build on what David just said, is that DEC reported that 50% of sites took less than 1.5 years from signing to COC, but it can be up to 4 years. And so building on what he just said, that DEC has its own website, that a page on its website that says common deficiencies in brownfield cleanup applications. And they go from leaving things blank, not really explaining not providing a narrative of the voluminous technical study that you just attach. And so what I would say is do your work, use plain language, explain the contamination, do a sufficient job explicitly explaining and responding to what is required in the BCP application, and constantly be moving the work forward in a clear and non-sloppy way. That's my tip though. Do the work.
Thanks, Molly. JJ, anything from you?
I don't have any closing remarks, but we do have 2 questions in Slido.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we wanted to address those with the time.
Yeah, go ahead. I was seeing they were coming in different chat boxes. So
Okay.
there
We
was
have one that says, we
Go ahead.
received our BCP CFC in 2016. We were delayed in receiving our final project entitlements until 2021. We only will have half of the in-place infrastructure completed and CO'd at the end of our 10-year window. Is there an extension to the 10-year window in order to receive full credits?
So Molly, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So there is only an extension that was granted during the pandemic, and you have to have your COC prior to 2015, December 31st of 2015, and then you can extend for, I think it's 180 months or 5-year period. So it extends the tax credit period to 15 years, but I don't believe there's any extension besides that one, depending on when you entered. You might not, it says you received it in 2016. So I think that there isn't the possibility to get that extension, but potentially reach out to the region. What do you think, Lindsey?
Yeah, and if you want to reach out to us too, we can take a look deeper at it and see if there might be any options available to you. And maybe it's a conversation with the Department of Finance, but typically it ends at that 10-year window unless there's, like Molly said, there were some caveats during COVID. Okay.
And then, do you want to do the second question?
Yeah, so there's a question that says, do you see cases where a municipality or public community development entity plays a role in a site prep credit setup and then provides those tax credits as incentives for continued redevelopment of the site by new parties? So I think if I understand the question, it's saying, right, is like a municipality or a local, maybe like an IDA, are they remediating a site to have credits on the table so they can then sort of sell a site that's both cleaned up and has available credits available to incentivize development? And I think IDAs do this pretty frequently, where they will take on a site, remediate it, and then have that available. So I think it's certainly an option. I don't know how prevalent this is. I don't know if IDAs, I know we have a lot of IDAs on, IDAs in Buffalo Niagara Partnership, and some of these others are on, I don't know if they can weigh in on any comments, responses here, but I don't know how prevalent it is, but it certainly is an option that can happen, right? And I know we've seen instances where the IDAs have done that.
They also do bridge financing, right? There's
yeah.
IDA, Capital Region, and New York State will help you finance the pre-development rollout and sometimes the bridge loan for the brownfields, which is very useful.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think that's it on the questions. David, any final closing marks from you?
Hey, a lot of brain damage, but worth it.
Well, I'd like to
It's a
thank
lot
our
of fun.
panelists and
A lot of
thank our panelists so much for the discussion today. Right, I think it's very clear, right? You gotta think early planning, very thoughtful planning on what your structure should look like, what you want to do. You know, think about those things early and often. And so, you know, more to come on this. This is such a fun program, and it can be very, very useful. I think, you know, David, I think it really a big driver on the success of a Brownfield program is a developer who truly understands the program and doesn't just rely on its team, right? A consultants, its legal team, et cetera, but a developer who knows it can really help drive it and make it more successful. So,
I would add, you can tell our closeness because Jillian, David, and I, and Lindsey on projects, you get really close trying to solve all these puzzles. So
hard to solve complex problems. Yeah. So I do want to advertise our next.
I'm only as good as my team is, so I would say
Right.
I'm very grateful to have had you.
So I want to plug the next installment in our real estate webinar series is called Permitting Pathways for Commercial and Industrial Development. That will take place later on in September. And if registration isn't available yet online, it will be soon, but look out for that. And we hope people register for that and hope to see you there. And any other questions, please follow up with us or David, and happy to continue the conversation. All right. Thanks all.
Bye.
bye.